In the Middle East, strong criticism of Israel by the United Nations and the U.S. tonight after yet another attack near a UN school killed at least 10 civilians. It came as Israel withdrew most of its ground forces from Gaza. The Palestinian death toll now put at over 1,800, while 64 Israeli soldiers and 3 civilians have died in this war. NBC's Richard Engel is in Gaza for us tonight. Richard?
Good evening, Lester. Israel said from the very beginning that its main mission in Gaza was to destroy Hamas's tunnels. Now that that's almost complete, Israeli forces are pulling back. But it doesn't mean this war is over.
This is what Israel has been doing to Hamas's tunnels in 3, 2, 1. Israel says it's blown up most of the tunnels, a labyrinth of passageways for Hamas fighters to hide, attack, and escape, even on motorcycles. It was at a tunnel where an Israeli soldier feared taken captive was killed. His funeral today. As he was laid to rest, Israel took a major step to make sure the rest of its soldiers are safer, pulling most of its forces out of the Gaza Strip, sending relieved soldiers back to Israel. The withdrawal means Israeli troops who have been gathered along Gaza's border for weeks will be far less vulnerable to attack. For Israel, the ground war could be ending.
But here in Gaza, it certainly doesn't feel like the war is winding down. All day there have been rockets launched from here toward Israel. We've watched them fly overhead, and there have been more Israeli airstrikes.
One of those strikes caused yet another tragedy. UN officials say Israel fired on a suspected Palestinian militant on a motorcycle just as he passed in front of a UN school full of 3,000 Palestinians taking shelter. At least 10 civilians were killed. Robert Turner, director of the UN program in Gaza, is stunned Israel chose to attack so close to the school.
Do you think Israel should have waited a few more seconds, a few more minutes until he was further away from this location?
Why, if this is a moving target and you're tracking him, why there? Why there, right at the gate of a shelter, the location of which you've been given 33 times, the last time not more than an hour before the attack?
In its strongest condemnation yet, the U.S. State Department said it was appalled by today's disgraceful shelling outside the school.
UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon called that attack near the UN school a moral outrage and a criminal act. Lester?
Richard Engel, thanks. And with Israel pulling its forces back from Gaza, we want to bring NBC's Martin Fletcher in Tel Aviv. Martin, is this a sign that things may be winding down, or it's the beginning of a new phase?
Well, Lester, judging by Israeli troop movements, it clearly is winding down, but we're going to have to see what comes next. The government here has said only that the army is, quote, regrouping. And these soldiers that we met on the border told us they're ready for anything, to go home or to go back in. If there's no new agreement with Hamas on the ceasefire, then Israel said its strategy will be deterrence. The hope that Hamas will have learned its lesson, they say, and won't start fighting again. On top of that, Israel says it could resume assassinations of Hamas leaders. And at tonight's funeral, an emotional, intense sharing of grief. And the hope was that Lieutenant Hadar Golden would be the last casualty of this war. There is hope that a ceasefire agreement to be worked out in Cairo without Israeli negotiators may be presented to Israel and accepted within a few days. But Hamas has said that if Israel withdraws without an agreement, there will be a war of attrition. That means more fighting soon.